Marketing is hard. But I'll tell you a little secret. It doesn't have to be. Let me point something out. You're listening to a podcast right now, and it's great. You love the host. You seek it out and download it. You listen to it while driving, working out, cooking, even going to the bathroom. Podcasts are a pretty close companion. And this is a podcast ad. Did I get your attention? You can reach great listeners like yourself with podcast advertising from Libsyn Ads. Choose from hundreds of top podcasts offering host endorsements, or run a pre-produced ad like this one across thousands of shows to reach your target audience in their favorite podcasts with Libsyn Ads. Go to libsynads.com, that's Libsyn, ads.com today.
Hey y'all, quick question. How many of you ever heard something on a podcast and thought, I gotta write that down, but only to miss it because rewinding is a hassle? Well, don't worry, I've got you covered. Check out the app ChatPods. Whenever a quote catches my ear, I just tap a button and it'll transcribe and save that moment for me to revisit later, especially for your garden. We go so fast it can be hard to keep up. It's how I listen to my favorite shows, and I'd love for you to try it with mine. Just check out the podcast description or search ChatPods in your app store. ChatPods. Capture podcast highlights anytime, anywhere.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
Well, welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast, everybody. Hope everybody's having an absolutely fantastic day, ladies and gentlemen. It is that time where we are going to do everybody's favorite episode. Well, I don't know about everybody's, but a lot of people's favorite. We're going to talk about our garden fails for the year. So was it last episode where we kind of danced around it a little bit?
Yeah, we opened it up. It was much more broad to like everything that didn't work out the way that we thought in our garden history.
Yeah. So
that
now,
episode was like 6 hours long, just for those that
it could have easily been. You know, it's funny. We could do from all of our garden wins, and it'd be from the beginning, and it would be just maybe an hour and a half. But we could do all of our fails, and it would be like just a couple hours, I mean, it happens. You know what I mean? So, do you have a lot of fails this year, Batavia?
So recognizing that I'm not hard on myself, but sometimes people perceive kind of my feedback as me being hard on myself. I got a bunch, a lot didn't go as planned this year.
For this year?
Yeah.
Being hard on yourself, I mean, it's kind of what you do. You know what I mean? I think that's how you improve.
I wouldn't describe it as hard on myself. I think based on the feedback I get, I think people feel like it's all, don't worry about that. I'm like, well, no, I'm not really. I'm just, kind of factual and actual. I want to know, like, this is a thing. Yeah. I have to reflect on it, so I can make the same mistake next year. Isn't it how we all work? And everybody
deserves a trophy, right?
Well, I didn't say that.
I did, because it drives me crazy. And no, I don't get a trophy if I did something wrong. And I think it's important for us to call out, like, hey, this didn't work out this year. We need to make sure that we understand that, we recognize it. And look, so what? You beat yourself up a little bit. It just gives me fuel to improve. I mean, what about you?
Yeah, I think it's important also because what we've been able to do together over these last handful of years is see like the common thread through something like fails, right? So sometimes I have to pull a couple of fails out because it's like they heard the same fail last year. Do they really want to hear about it again?
Yeah, it does take some time to kind of get everything moving. And I mean, sometimes a fail goes from year to year, but does that fail get less and less? That's the question.
No, it's always either the same or like even worse for me.
Well, we do know that you were on a 3-year schedule for things. So how about this? On the 4th year, does it get better?
On the 4th year, I've done enough to basically say I'm over it and I don't need to give it a try anymore. So by default, I'm not doing it.
Got it.
So yeah, it's better.
Yeah. So look, if you want to support the podcast, come join us on Patreon, be an Apple subscriber. And also we are on YouTube now. This video is live on YouTube. The link is below for that. But look, here's the deal. We want the video portion to go out to everybody, and the members and people who want to be members and subscribers to the extra podcast. The video is going to go out there, but we have to wait for YouTube to let us make it so we can have members. So just go onto YouTube if you don't mind and watch this video all the way. Don't even watch it. Just play it in the background. You've already listened to it, and just let it play in the background so we have to get a certain amount of watch hours or whatever. So, but if we do that, we're almost there. Then we can make the members, and we have a members section on there. And then that's just for you guys. We really, or you ladies and gentlemen, excuse me. We really want to make sure that the videos go out to everybody, and we are doing the members one as video. So until they do, they will be banked up, and then they will all be released. If the video's there, it will be released onto YouTube when that is available as well. And also, all of our seeds are available in our seed shop. So check out our seed shop. The link is below. Use the code YBBBB and get yourself a discount. Orders over $35, get free shipping, and come get it. We just packed an order for a full, I don't know, it's probably a full farm, it seemed like today, but we definitely appreciate it. And the reason for the code is Young Ben and Batavia the Brave Botanical, or Botanical
Clearly.
Brave. Whichever one she named herself. I don't know. There's so many bees I get confused.
In December, it's Baby Batavia. It's my birth month. So you gotta go back to the beginning.
Oh, boy.
Batavia, Baby Botanical.
Okay. Well, it's still the same amount of bees, just so you know. I don't want to get confused.
All right. So just so I'm clear, every episode, if you listen to it for free on your podcast of choice, whatever app you're listening, at some point those will be available on YouTube. But we need your support to basically get some numbers into YouTube, which they'll be able to actually see and hear and all of that. The second part is we've had for many, many moons a special monthly episode that drops for patrons and Apple subscribers. We want to make sure that that episode, the video portion, is also available for those that are supporting the channel in that way. And that's the piece that we're banking, right? Yeah.
And I mean, look, until Tim Cook allows us, we can't offer the video to Apple subscribers. We tried to figure out ways around it, and it's beyond me. You look, man, I'm a gardener, I'm a homesteader, I'm a beekeeper, I'm a filmmaker, I'm a podcaster. I can't be anything else. You know what I mean? I can't reinvent the wheel. I'm sorry.
I'm in queue. I have like a 24/7 hold where I'm actually on hold to speak to Tim Cook about this. So if I get through, I'll let y'all know. But until then.
Well, you better hurry up because he ain't young. And we are deep in the line. Anyways, so thank you, everybody. And feel free to support us. That being said, I'm going to do something different than I normally do.
Something that you've not talked to me about prior to this episode?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm not going to let you go first today. I'm going to put my Southern chivalry away and just say no. And I'm going to go first. How's that?
Go for it, dude.
It makes me nervous because I don't ever do that.
Here we are.
Yeah, here we are. All right. So in the year of our Lord, 2024, my first mistake was planting my tomatoes. I wanted to monocrop them in beds, and that did not work for me. So there's a lot of reasons why. So what happened was I planted. There's a lot of things that occurred with this. I planted ace bush tomatoes, which we have in our store. I really wanted to plant those because they were determinate, heirloom, slicer tomatoes. So they kind of hit all of the boxes that I wanted. But what I didn't realize is the bush in the name was legit bush. I mean, they got wide. So they kind of just overgrew each other quite a bit. And we haven't done a spacing episode yet. We've got it slated for going into spring. And I definitely want to bring this up, but it didn't work out well. I mean, I had tomatoes that were falling over. They were shading each other out. I couldn't get in there and work. And, I couldn't harvest efficiently like I wanted to. So that didn't really work out well for me. But I think what's going to happen, I'm going to go back to what I did before. And I'm going to plant. I don't want to say companion plant, but that's basically what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to have to intermingle them, and it was my chance to go like full in on monocropping. And as soon as I did it, and as soon as the tomatoes grew, I didn't like it.
Yeah. So that was absolutely your plan coming into the year, though.
To monocrop,
right? What? Yeah. So you plan for one thing, and okay, that's why you're considering this a fail, is because
I mean, it wasn't really working for me. Now there is another thing to it. Is there was a trellis on the back end of one. So, and I've done this before, but because I couldn't get in from the front as easy.
Yeah.
So not being able to get in from the front or the back was just like this whole snowball effect. And then I did another bed that was, what did I put over there? I put red snapper tomatoes in there. I hate when I do that. And they grew well, and I filled the bed up, but it just didn't do what I wanted it to. They were just it was just a shading issue going on. So I think it's just best if I just kind of pull back and reevaluate. And I talked about in the last episode, I don't want to bring it because we'll run out of time quick, on how I'm going to manage that. But so we're going to adjust the way we plant our tomatoes for next year. But this is just part of like trying it out and seeing what happens, kind of throw it up against the wall and see what sticks.
Mm-hmm. Or against the trellis.
Yeah.
So my first one is one I haven't talked to you about. I haven't talked to the audience about here or on my YouTube. I had a prolific cucumber year, and cucumbers scream summer to me, right? It's one of the first things I've ever grown in a garden. I have had, kind of hit or miss luck when it comes to cucumber plants staying healthy and actually producing. Some years I have way too many. Some years I have barely enough. And my plan was to make like a dozen or more cucumber, I should say refrigerator pickles. So that was the plan. I started getting cucumbers on schedule. I had them in the backyard garden, kind of intermingled with some other things. And then I had them in the front yard garden, like trellising up the actual fence in the front yard. And the very first cucumber that I picked and ate was bitter. And I didn't weigh or count, but I'd estimate 60 to 70% of the cucumbers as a whole were bitter. I was literally tasting every single cucumber. And it's probably, when it comes to like garden produce, there's not a whole lot that's like leaves the worst aftertaste in your mouth than a bitter cucumber. And so unfortunately, the only thing I could track it back to is just inconsistent watering, which signed me up for it. The varieties that I've grown before. They're not known for something like being bitter. I got to the point where I was ready to just toss it all, because I'm picking them. Even the ones that, I'm picking really small, because my first thought is, okay, I've let some of these go too long. Picking them. I had a 5-gallon bucket of cucumbers one evening, and way more than half of them I had to toss, and so that's super frustrating. Of course, there's some waste there. I obviously did work on, tending to that particular set of plants, and I ended up tossing it. So I don't know that I can promise myself that I won't have a similar experience next year. Obviously, you want to be a bit better about watering. I've never had this many cucumbers that just didn't perform.
Why? You think it was just inconsistent watering?
I think so. I look at the varieties I've grown. I did grow one new variety, and those plants, sometimes they produce cucumbers that were fine. Sometimes they produce cucumbers that were bitter. This is what I mean. I'm tasting every one of them. Some of them are good. There's no, we're not talking over, we're not talking that are starting. I know that, and the size that the variety is noting, these were at prime. My mission is say
I just Googled it and I got a whole list of things. Did you Google it at all?
Yeah, back in the summer.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing is it's stress. So whatever was stressing it out, probably inconsistent watering. That was right up there. Man, that sucks, dude. That sucks to get that many cucumbers and just toss. I mean, basically have to toss them, right?
I probably had to toss them. I probably had more cucumbers than I've ever had in a garden, and I guess thank goodness for the number of plants that I actually put in, because that's the only way that I probably have 6 or 8 quart-sized jars of refrigerator pickles. That was the intention. Of course, I ate some fresh as far as cucumbers go. And I, judge if you want, but I've had cucumbers where I've turned them into refrigerator pickles last the spring of the following year. So that was the plan. I was intentionally planning on growing a lot of cucumbers, and I did.
Right.
I couldn't even give cucumbers away because I just didn't know what they were going to taste like. And it's not it's worse than even bitter lettuce or a bitter green. It's one of the worst. I have to have a palate cleanser to then cut and taste the next cucumber that I'm cutting out of my basket. So yeah, it's just, it was frustrating.
Yeah, that sounds frustrating. Have you considered next year just letting that area rest for a bit and not planting on that trellis?
Well, I did a lot of work to put that trellis up against the fence, and I plan on putting peas there. And I don't plan on putting cucumbers there, so I am letting it rest from a cucumber perspective. It is in a questionable area when it comes to soil, the one in the front yard.
Mm-hmm.
Flowers do wonderful there. Any type of vegetable crop it's hit or miss when it comes to its performance. So, we'll see. I think I'm going to go back to the traditional planting of cucumbers are going to be growing on the trellis along that cattle panel, in the front yard, easily able to get to the cucumbers to pick them. I've done better when it comes to watering those beds as a whole versus that narrow space. And then the section in the backyard, it was intermingled with corn, with potatoes. I just actually tossed those cucumber seeds in because I had a potato plant die. And so I said, let me fill the space. So I think kind of that balance of not wanting to water the potatoes too much, and the balance of how much water or how little water is the corn plants. I'm pretty sure once I did things like a deep watering, I noticed the next week or two, the cucumbers were generally fine. Right. So that's why I lean back onto it was a gardener,
Are you still hand watering?
Of course, I'm still hand watering. Yeah, I guess it would be unfair of me to say an easier solution to, produce more consistent watering would be some type of irrigation system. I'm just not there yet. I'm not there.
Well, we're year one into you thinking about it, so we understand.
I didn't say that.
Yeah, well, as far as openly thinking about it, no.
This is probably, if it is tied to watering, this is probably, I don't want to spend that much more time. I'll just bring a jar of pickles here the next time we record.
Yeah.
If it's tied to watering, this is probably the first time and the most impact my watering method has had on the negative front. Generally speaking, sure, there are a couple of containers that may dry up because I just didn't get to them. Some flowers that may not make it. But when it comes to veggies and herbs and things of that nature, generally speaking, my watering practice of hand watering has done well. This is probably the most loss I've experienced. So it's something to note.
Yeah.
But, I'm still not there.
Well, I don't want to sit here and sound like hand watering is not effective and you can't grow a garden that way. I absolutely don't believe that. But, and you know, the way my mind works is when I think about it and I look at it and, you know, we start listing the things that are wrong. It's how can we eliminate certain issues? And so, you know, obviously if you're having an inconsistent watering, but I mean, truth be told, you didn't have this issue ever before, and I don't imagine you like all of a sudden just sucking at watering your garden. You know what I mean? Like it's not something that just creeps up on you. Did you have a really dry year?
No, I don't think so. But
or was it really wet?
It was neither. It was,
okay.
I think, all things considered, you know, pretty much the same type of summer. I'm in Chicago, Illinois. If you're new, hey, and our summers never get hot. You know, it's a pretty mild climate when it comes to like growing a garden in my view. And I think the note is the places I grew cucumbers are different, you know, so it was a really good idea. Like I love the look. Some of that was like, oh, one more space I can create a trellis for. Like I had all of these thoughts around it and it made sense until, again, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on if it's tied to the watering. You know, it wasn't the most convenient place. If I'm truly honest, it's such an odd setup when it comes to like, I have to kind of come out into the sidewalk and then water with my hose into the yard. And I don't normally really need to do that. The other things that have grown in that area, they kind of like sunflowers, they kind of get what they need from, you know, earth, you know, from the rain, right? I don't have to do a lot of babying to that particular area.
Yeah.
And so there definitely was some out of sight, out of mind moments. Yeah. But this kind of ties to, since we're still here, you know, this kind of ties to that bit of continually moving things around and trying new spaces. And sometimes there's quite literally loss from doing that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's like with my garden, it continues to grow and change shape. And, you know, you start moving around. And I mean, you know, we've said this a lot on the show, but with gardening, it's not like you start a tomato in April and then in May you're like, oh, never mind, I want to move it somewhere else. Let me move it to another area and see how it does. It's kind of like you got to wait a year. So sometimes we don't find these things out for many, many years. And, you know, so I've got 11 beds. And if I rotate between them, that means in 11 years, I'll figure out what my tomatoes are going to do well at. You know what I mean? Like it's crazy to think about, but I get it. And cucumbers, same thing, you know. It's just, luckily with cucumbers, we typically don't have trellises in every single bed, so we can kind of narrow it down a little bit better. But that sucks. I feel for you on that one.
Yeah, luckily it wasn't as high of a value crop either. And my last note on that, which, you know, because I don't want to bring it up in my next one, is it kind of feeds into knowing a space isn't really fertile, like knowing that you've had struggles with it, but taking the chance again, right? And it's like at some point during the season, I kind of forgot like, oh, this space, you know, I've had some spring crops in that same space along the fence in the front yard. And like it's just, they've not done well. Cooler times, I have all kinds of volunteers, you know, in the cooler weather, things kind of just spring up. Some things don't need as much care, and cucumber plants are kind of finicky, you know. So I tried it, and I'm looking at that space more as a bonus space that I can put flowers in. Again, I'm planning on doing peas because the fencing or the wire is up, so there is vining things that can grow, and then I'll probably do flowers after that. It's just one more thing I don't want to have to worry about next year.
Yeah.
You know, one could argue I could grow cucumbers there next year, you know, tossing crop rotation, and they may be fine. But I'm ready to move on from babying that space for a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, look, if you got an infertile space, it's work the soil, keep planting in it, you know, you know, plant it intelligently. Don't just start randomly, but you know, you have something that's doesn't have a high nutrient demand, you can put that in that section and it'll do good. So, all right, enough of your cucumbers.
I feel like we've talked about it so long, I've eaten all through my
You've gotten through them all.
Pickles already during the episode.
So, one of mine is it teeters on both. Okay, it teeters on a win and a fail, and I'm going to kick it into the fail side. So I'm not going to bring it up in the next episode. I don't plan on it, at least. But it's my onions. So onions were an issue for me this year. I did great with them. I got lots of onions. It was great. I planted 96 onions and I got 90 onions. And most of them were of decent size. They weren't huge. And that really goes to me, my planting date. But the issue that I had was when I planted them, when they come out of the garden is such an awkward time for them, for the garden. So I plant them right around, last year I planted them around either now or January. I can't remember. I should have put them in October, but that's neither here nor there. But when I put them in, when they come out in June. So that's kind of an issue because June is the time in which it's almost like this period of time when there's not a lot going in the garden. There's not a lot ready. Your summer garden's kind of set up and ready to kind of flow through. And so I pulled them up and I kind of had a brain fart. I didn't really know what to do. And part of this is, half of my garden is split. So if you're facing the garden, the left side gets the most sun, the right side gets a fair amount of shade. But it's not really bad in the summertime because the sun's high, we get long days, and it gives it a break from the heat. So I ended up planting corn in there, popcorn, and that worked okay as far as like a follow-up crop. But I don't know. And the other aspect of it is we just, plain and simple, we didn't eat 90 onions. I think we threw out like half of them. We just could not get through all of them. And they were sweet onions because that's typically what we grow in the South here. And they didn't last. So I think this year going into it, it's going to be all about eliminating the onion, not having it grow completely and staying in the garden for as long. I go back and forth because moving from onion to corn really was a pretty good, transition. The only issue is onions are heavy nitrogen feeders and corn is a heavy nitrogen feeder. And so the issue I had with my corn was I wasn't getting the growth and the development of the ears that I wanted, which means that I wasn't getting the size on the stalks that I needed to get them up. So what was really going on, I think, is when the onions came out, the soil was already depleted of nitrogen because they suck so much nitrogen out of it. And when I put the corn in, there just wasn't enough juice left in the soil to keep it going. So it kind of works out both ways because onions, I said this a couple years ago on the show, where a bag of onions is only like $4. So I'm not losing a lot. And in that time frame of, let's say I planted them when I was supposed to in October. So from October all the way to June, I can rotate out 32 cabbages. And then I could put in on top of that, like 20 pepper plants or something. And monetarily, I would come out way ahead than if I just had my onions planted. So I think this year what we're going to do is, first of all, I'm not growing onions this year. That's out. Yeah. So we're not doing that. But I have a space in the greenhouse and I have a couple onion seeds left over. And I think what I'll do is I may put them in the greenhouse because that June time frame is the greenhouse is done at that point. There's nothing else going on. And I can just let it go, let the onions grow, harvest them when I need to. They're going to be a little bit behind, but it's just something to play around with and see what happens. So I'm not overly concerned about it. But it also didn't help that when I started my onion seeds, something happened. I think the wind blew over the thing I was growing in and they all got jacked up and lost them. So at that point I was like, you know what, it's just not worth it. And it really gave me a chance to step back and take a look at it and evaluate the situation. So that's me and onions this year.
I was a little bit, there was a sad face that came on when he said you're not growing them next year. And this is the first year that I've had a real success with onions. Mine didn't get like a Whopper size, and that's okay. Like they're large enough to not go bad because they're so small. And, you know, when it comes to the types of dishes that I use onions, which I do use them a lot, I like the idea of having a smaller size onion for those. And it's one of those like, oh, great, I finally cracked the code, which was starting them from seed. And if I would have planted them a little bit earlier, I would have had good luck. But I get and respect the idea that, hey, it's not worth the time, the energy, the space, you know, in your garden, and you're going to move on from it. So my next one, and this one is, again, because these are more like the confessional episodes. Here we go. So my issue has been, and I've not said it out loud, and I think people have observed it. I've had a couple of people that are close to me in life that have kind of hinted at it. It's too much, right? I'm growing too much of the wrong things. So I look at this year. I look at this year, and I had my first garden in 2008, and I've grown a garden every year since then. I had my first garden of this size in 2019. So this is the 6th growing year. And that seems like a long time, but I am really just figuring out my needs and my desires, everything from crops to actual quantities. And so for y'all don't know, and you can look at my face and understand this, it's just me here in this space. So when you see me in my garden and what I'm growing, whatever is consumed, I'm consuming like 90+% of it myself. And so when you look at, and I've talked about this over the years, the number of fresh crops, things are the best when eaten fresh. I have been working towards scaling back on that. And we've talked about me growing more storage crops that will hold with little work, and it will, hold until I get around to it. So your butternut squash as an example, onions as an example, sweet potatoes, even though, those go through a curing process and they can sit on the shelf and be shelf stable. I also throw in things like carrots and cabbage, which have a longer refrigerator life than most other root vegetables. And I look at those, and if I compare how much I grow those crops, I've not done the percentage, but I just put in my mind, adding it to my list over the winter, the percentage of those that I grow compared to all of your fruiting vegetables, even your leafy greens. I grow a lot more of those that have a high demand when it comes to pick it and eat it or preserve it, right? And so I enjoy a lot of those vegetables more. Right? Your tomatoes, your peppers, your kale, your lettuce, all of those things I enjoy more, but it's a burden that I've been taking on year over year. And this year, coupled with a couple of things that were happening personally, it was just too much. It was very clear that while I have worked out, okay, I can grow these things in my garden. These are spaces that grow well. These are spaces that don't. I really have to reconfigure how many of a thing I'm planting, knowing that I may not plant 96 onion plants and get 90 of them. I have to figure out what that number is for me. And I really have to shift things where I may not have 100 tomato plants. At least once in my life, I want to grow 100 tomato plants. I don't get anywhere near that number. But when it comes to tomatoes, I'm looking at something like every other year, right? Having more, and then the next year or two, even having less. Like the demand for those types of crops is just too high for my lifestyle, just to be frank. And I need to scale back on some of those things that have a higher demand. And a lot of those things are prolific too, which is the gift and the curse. I'm never complaining about growing too much food in general, but I can be smarter with my planning and then planting. So that one's super hard. There's so much there. That's like, stay tuned for the next episode. That was about everything I just said.
Yeah. Well, no, we've done that episode.
So I should have learned already? Are you saying that this really should be on the fail list? Already?
I don't know. I'm trying to think. And my memory may be muddy, so give me some grace here. But I think we talked about growing the essentials. I know we did an episode about it, like going back in the day, people grew kind of the stuff you're talking about, cabbage, carrots, all the stuff that lasted longer, stored easily. So I think that we definitely talked about it. And I think it was last year or the year before that I may have said that that's what I was going to do. And I don't know if you were on board with me or not. I can't remember.
No,
it's really hard to catalog all of our conversations. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure it was last year. If it wasn't in 2023, it was in 2022 going into 2023. So I would have had like 2 years to do it. And I think the theme of like the spirit of growing more storage crops, that happened, but it wasn't with the conscious thought of, and then grow less of a different thing. That's the other part to it, right? So now I look to say I have 4 honey nut squash, which I grew on accident. I thought they were melon plants. So I put those seeds to the ground. They came up and I started watching them. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Right. And I thought I planted honey nut squash somewhere else and that didn't come up. But I look at something like that. And one of those it's like a side for me. So I'm going to go through them. Right. By the time you guys hear this aired, I'm probably going to have eaten all of them. So I say all of that to say I have really been approaching the garden as like almost a singular vegetable or herb. Like that's the focus. Like I have in mind what I want to do with the singular thing, tomatoes. I have in mind what I want to do with peppers. And maybe I have done this and maybe I'm just reinventing this thing in my mind, but I've not said, all right, you pull all of this together. Onions can you have in your garden while also thinking that you have X number of sweet potatoes, right? So I hope that you're getting this. I see a little bit of a static on the line.
No, you're good.
Can you hear me?
Caller's here.
So there's a lot to think about there. And it's, thank goodness I've come to this and really admitted it towards the end of the year, because I do have my garden plan that I still need to work through. And it impacts it significantly. Yeah.
And I mean, when it comes down to it and you want to focus on, crops that are storable, it's really, in my mind, and as a garden as a whole, it's all about getting the quantity of what you want to grow in the space that you have. And it does mean making sacrifices. It does mean pulling things out of your garden. It does mean going a little bit deeper and, making it so that some things just, you plant more often and really take advantage of that multi-season garden that we've always talked about. So I think you got lucky with your honey nut squash this year for sure. I don't see why. I'm glad. I said the wrong word. I'm glad that you ended up getting those because you kind of get to taste something new, try it out. Yeah. You saw how it grew, and
it's one of my favorites. So I've had it before.
How many melons can you grow though? I mean, how many melons can you consume? That's the issue that I have. And when we going back to my onion debacle this year, I mean, the thing is onions go in every meal, right? For the most part. I mean, if you find a recipe, most of them say, add an onion. But at the same time, like I did that and I could not get all my onions consumed before they went bad. So where does that leave you? You know what I mean? Like, it's insane to think about, but I'm glad that you kind of are having this, I call it evolution. It's the evolution of the garden, something that we've tried to talk about multiple times. And I think the only way to point it out is in each episode, but you start getting it, and I mean, you'll find it, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, and I know that you could chop up and freeze onions, right?
Yeah.
You know that, but do you want to? That kind of goes back to last year coming into this year. I knew I had to have really a system a process, what I'm harvesting, when I get it inside. And if I keep to that, I'll be on top of it. But I have greatly underestimated the work that it takes for me to get things processed.
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of these things, like tomatoes are a good example. I see a lot of people harvest them, put them in the freezer, deal with them later. Now, there are a couple of dishes that I really like, and I want them to be with fresh tomatoes. And I just have to kind of give that up in some instances, right? It's better for me to have bags of tomatoes frozen than to lose a tomato on my dining room, table. Like that's like where I am with it. So I need to be realistic with the time that I expect to have. I need to be realistic with the things that I know I'll eat and how I'll eat them. And it's hard to actually predict that, but it's not impossible. Right. And I just have to give that some more attention because I know I'll be happier in my garden. And that's like hard stop. That's the goal.
Yeah. So one that I want to bring up, and I'm not going to bring this up anymore after this because I've talked about it a lot, is my wild garden. I saw it last year. I saw it struggle, and I saw it the year before struggle. And I should have taken the advice of old Martha Stewart and said, just rip it all out. But I went into the garden year, and Batavia, correct me if I'm wrong, I actually told you early in the year, like, hey, I'm thinking about pulling out the wild garden. Mm-hmm. And I wish that I would have taken a step back and pulled that out, because what ended up happening is I wasted time. I wasted my efforts. I wasted my money. I wasted a lot trying to get everything to do. I was trying to bend it to my will, and it just didn't really work out the way I wanted to. So, I've talked about it at length on YouTube and, on the podcast. I did it on the listeners episode. We talked about what we're planning to do over there. But the moral of the story is really just, hey, get this stuff out of there. If you see an issue like that, like if you see something where basically what was going on is the garden just wasn't really producing like we wanted to, it seemed to always struggle. The best period of time for production in it was from February into July. That was the best time. And when it came down to it, and I take a step back and think about it, well, that's the most sun that we get is during that period. We're coming out of winter. So typically winter plants take, cool season crops don't need as much sun. You could get away with 4 to 5 hours of sun versus, 6 to 8. So that's why those did good. And then you transfer over into the spring or into the summer crops. They would start out good, but they would eventually kind of die out. And we really, out of the 4 beds we had over there, only one of them actually would kind of hang in there. And even that one would kind of give out. So, over the years, I should have been more into it. This is kind of a culmination of all the years, but this year in particular, because as I looked at it and I watched it and I went into the season with it already in my mind that I wanted to get rid of it, I was like, I'm going to give it one more shot. I should have just done it, but at the same time, I had a lot of projects that were going on, and I just didn't have the time to kind of add that because, moving the beds, filling the beds and all that stuff. I had already added 2 beds last year. I was filling those. I was building irrigation for them, all that stuff. It was just too much. So I give myself a little bit of grace for that. But in the grand scheme of things, man, just act on it, because I could have done, essentially what I was working with in my garden was almost half the space that I was anticipating working with. And I always look at it when I'm planning my garden, I'm like, this is the year it's going to do great. And it just never really lived up to the expectations that we had set for it. So moving on, I'm no longer talking about this issue. I'm tired of talking about it, but it's a really important, I feel like it's really important to talk about, but it's just, the horse is dead. And I even stomped on its head. It's over. So from here on out, we're only going to be talking about what's happening in that space now. But just know that if you see a space in your garden that doesn't look good, doesn't produce the way you want, just go ahead and get rid of it. And now's the time.
Mm-hmm.
Now's the time to make that plan.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got months to figure it out. So take advantage.
Yeah, for sure. You know, if you don't want to get rid of it, even use it for something that's like less important. Let it rest. Like there are a couple of things that you can do. I think that when I look at kind of the last one, and I was trying to think about for all of these, for you and I, are these things that we know going in? Like, do we know better?
Yeah.
Or we're just not doing better, you know? And so this last one for me, I think, is pretty simple. I touched on it, I think, in last week's episode. Like I have a terrible, I mean, we've been talking about this for years, the leaving a thing in the ground on the plant too long. Right. And so it's been isolated prior, like in our prior conversations around it. But I can look back over this year and I have 4 or 5 garlic, sweet potatoes more recently. Let's see, regular white potatoes. These are all things that I can see evidence of when I harvested them, that they should have been pulled weeks prior. And in almost all of those cases, I remember saying, maybe not the potatoes, but for the others, white potatoes, sweet potatoes, I remember for the garlic, I remember looking and saying, the carrots even, oh, I should go ahead and harvest those. And generally speaking, for some of these, there's not a whole lot of work once you pull them out of the ground. You know, like I can get back to my garlic when I've pulled them a week from now. You know, I just need to make sure that there's some air circulating, right? So I put this thing off. This is the downside of making everything a project, you know? And so, and I've confirmed in my mind that it's not even about kind of gathering the content, because these are some of the things that I'm not even filming, right? You know, it's just like, I've just not stopped to get to it. Oh, it's raining. Let the soil dry. It's a couple of weeks later that I'm looking up, and I dug my sweet potatoes out the first week of November, which generally speaking, I have dug sweet potatoes out right before the frost, which would be like right at the end of October. And because I'm convinced that I don't have a really hot climate, I want to leave those in there as long as I can. I had signs. I think there were sweet potatoes like climbing out of the soil, like almost a month prior to that. And instead of like letting the plants tell me what they wanted, I left them in there, you know? Yeah. And so I mean, I think that it kind of ties back to, all right, how much time I have, but that also ties to, if I'm planting so many things where I can't make time to pull garlic much easier than digging up sweet potatoes, then I need to really make some cuts when it comes to what I'm growing, you know? Yeah.
You know, it's funny. We talk about these fails, and they are all linked together. Mm-hmm. When we go through it, it's like, you know, it's funny to me because every single one in each one of our gardens are all linked around a central theme. And, I think that's what it's going to be most years. And it's just, it's the way we plan, we work through our garden, and we do stuff like that. And, you know, so this episode is brought to you by the Planter app. So check out the link below and get yourself a discount. The Planter app staff, Peter, the creator of it, just wanted me to tell you guys about it. No big long ad today. So there you go. Enjoy the Planter app and use it to plan your garden. How's that? Thank you so much for being with us, and become a subscriber, become a patron. Please watch this video on YouTube. There's now 2 at this point on there, the new ones, and we will continue make them going forward. Become a friend and pick up some seeds, backyard garden seeds on Etsy. Check out the link below. Get the Planter app. And remember, on this show, we do 2 things. We learn to grow, and we grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the show, and thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by checking out our seed shop below. We have all kinds of seeds available for you, and we're going to be adding new seeds shortly, so check that out. Get yourself some seeds. It's free shipping, over $35 orders, so go ahead, get a full garden. What are you waiting for? Order your seeds and stock up. Or you can become a subscriber. You can either be an Apple subscriber or a patron, and that will help support the show. You'll get one free episode every month, an extra episode, that is. So we definitely would love to see you over there and become part of our crew. Join the Backyard Gardens community garden in Facebook. That's free. Go ahead, join that, and join the community where all the listeners get together and they can help each other out with their trials and tribulations and just show off their gardens. There's not a better way to do it. And if you're curious about what's going on in our gardens, you can check out our individual YouTube channels. So I'm at Sandy Bottom Homestead, and Batavia is at Be Better Garden. You can check that out and see how each of us are growing and what we talk about on those, because a lot of times we will coincide with the podcast and help add information in that maybe we didn't get out in the show or we feel that's pertinent at a certain time of year. So check that out and enjoy seeing our gardens and what we do in them. And we have an Amazon store which has all the products that we use and recommend in our gardens, and it helps support our show. And we also add to this list periodically, so be sure to check it out periodically to see if there's anything that you need for your garden. Everything that you do, including a like and a subscribe and even a review, will help us learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.